Hey everyone, welcome back to the Kirkpatrick Podcast. Today I've got a very good friend of ours, Jordan Rawlinson, our learning and performance strategist at Kirkpatrick Partners. Jordan, how are you?
I'm doing great. It's the beginning of a new year, so I always feel refreshed with a new focus and intentions and all of that. So
Oh,
we're
wait,
good.
remind me, what's your word of the year? I think you kind of told me.
Yeah, I had loose ideas, but I've confirmed my word of the year is power.
Ooh, tell me more. Why?
So it's more so about, I feel like in some ways it feels very daunting, like, oh, power, but it's more about staying in my power and like my firm foundation of like knowing who I am and my priorities and what matters to me and not feeling like, I don't know, off center.
Yeah.
But it's a lot of building upon the strong foundations that I've already built in the last few years and just kind of having like a no nonsense, unbothered, can't be shaken kind of attitude. So,
I love that. That's sort of similar. Like, my word of the year is peace. I'm like, I just want peace. Whatever way that comes, like I'm tired of constantly being in survival mode or like fight mode. Some may call it like being in my masculine, right? Like I just want to like a little bit more like let what comes come and I will deal with it because I've got my foundation and I've got my, I'm centered. So I love this for us because it feels like similar but different. So that's going to be fun to see how that plays out for the year.
yeah, for
So,
sure.
so today we have a very special episode for you all. So coming up on February 13th, we've got a free webinar for our Kirkpatrick friends. And if you are listening to this after February 13th, or you cannot make it on February 13th, we've got the replay. We always post our replay so you can catch the webinar later. We've got a very fun webinar that I don't think has really been done from the Kirkpatricks in the past. We're titling it, obviously, because it's Valentine's Day the next day, Defining the Relationship, right? Love a good theme and love a good play on words and what's happening around us. But we're calling it Defining the Relationship. And really, the relationship that we're talking about is a relationship about like with your team when it comes to learning and performance and evaluation. We thought about what are some of the topics that our audience really wants to hear more about. I think there's so much that still can be said, but we've done a lot of talking about defining relationships with your stakeholders, build like gaining buy-in and all of that. The missing piece has still been what about the relationship amongst your team and understanding who's strong where, who needs to be where. And so that's what today's episode is going to be all about. And Jordan, I want to kick it off to you. When it comes to evaluation teams, L&D teams that you've seen, that you've worked with, that have maybe come through some of the programs, are there any sort of key skills or like things in common that you see amongst those that work and that excel in those in learning and development or performance and evaluation?
Yeah. Um, I think when you look at evaluation overall, there's a lot of moving parts and
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of different strengths that are needed to do it well. And that's not to say that those have to be performed by different people.
Right.
I've certainly been a team of one, a team of two, and I've had to wear a lot of those hats.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe not every single part is my strength, but we figure it out. But I think in an ideal situation, if you do have a bigger team, like a lot of the folks that come through our programs, you'll see it broken up where some people are focused on just training and the facilitation.
Mm-hmm.
Some people are focused on purely evaluating it after the fact,
Yeah.
doing field interviews. Some folks are in the design where they're not working with participants, they're not following up after the fact, but it's all, the design ahead of time. And I don't think there's anything inherently bad or wrong about that, breaking it up, but it is a um, very much important to work together and have that be a cohesive team where you are leveraging the different strengths that come with the different, I guess, parts or phases of evaluation.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, so when I think of, so the at Anchored Training, the reason that I love a team mentality is because I got really sick and tired of being the one that had to be really good at everything.
Yeah.
And the reason I say that is because I was not good at everything, right? Like I'm horrible at graphic design. Like I can't do it for myself. I could tell you like if there's a template I can start from, like if there's a Canvas situation, great. I can tell you what I like, but like me doing it, it's just like not my thing, right? Not like artistic. That's what my daughter is for, as you've seen. And it actually started to affect my performance in other areas that I was good at because I was focusing so much time and energy on one, shame and feeling bad about what I was good at, what I wasn't good at, and like wanting to be better, comparing myself, like having imposter syndrome and comparing myself with others. And it it was a drain. It's kind of like going back to like my word of the year and like having peace, right? It was like I didn't have peace because I was always like, I'm horrible at this. People are better. Like I'm going to be found out that I'm not really that great of an instructional designer. And it's like, but like not like that is just, that's too much for one person to be amazing at everything. If everyone is amazing at everything, everybody be a unicorn. And like I'm a unicorn, but maybe just not in everything. And so that's why I started building this team mentality and saying, why am I going to suffer and spend more time and spend more energy on the areas that I'm not strong at? I'll hire out for those, you know, like, so I hired a graphic designer to help me in that skill area. Right. And then what started happening is I started feeling happier and better about the work I was doing. I was producing it faster. And I was able to actually then focus on the skills in that area and take them to the next level to really expand and provide better quality than me trying to be like mediocre at certain areas. Like, have you read The Big Leap by, I think, Sky Hendricks?
No, I haven't.
I'll have to send that to you. I have a couple books to send to you. So The Big Leap, he talks about, you know, that you've got your zone of incompetence, your zone of competence, your zone of genius, your zone of excellence. And like, you really want to spend most of your time in like your zone of genius and zone of excellence, like preferably your zone of genius as much as possible. But what often happens is that we hang out in like maybe excellence, but like competence and like incompetence for far too long. And it actually makes us almost miserable, like we burn out. And so I started taking that mentality to my team and saying like, all right, I'm going to hire people and build a team together. One, we can go faster, right? Because like I'm not doing the whole project. I can do 10 hours on this project, 10 hours on that project. And now I can be on multiple things, but I'm working in my strengths. I'm not switching as much when it comes to like tasks, which takes a long time to go back and forth between task switching.
Yeah.
But products started to be a lot better. And I think of that when it comes to, you know, evaluation teams and L&D teams is how can we structure when we have that capacity to say, these are my strengths. These are the areas I am good at. And that's okay. And I wonder, so all my monologue I'm about to be done with, I wonder is, do you think that part of the reason or one of the challenges why people don't evaluate is because they think it's all about numbers and data and I'm going to have to put it into and understand that. And that's not their zone of competence even. And they just shy away from it. And they're like, you know what? The LMS is going to tell me who was there, if they liked it, you know what I mean? And that's where I'm going to stick with it and not try to get to levels 3 and 4.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think just from like a research and scientific standpoint, there's all kinds of data about like how procrastination isn't necessarily about someone being incompetent. It is that like, oh, I have to be perfect. I have to be good at this. I have to, like, you're
Hmm.
intimidated by a task because either you've never done it before or it isn't in your zone of excellence. Um, and even all of the research in positive psychology and with like strengths finders and Clifton strengths,
Yeah.
like there is data that shows it is literally better to focus on your strengths rather than wasting time in your weaker zones, like you're talking about. Um, I feel like that was luckily for me, a lesson that I learned pretty early when I was in college. I was involved on campus and did a lot of student leadership stuff. And so we had the opportunity to do our own strengths assessment. And as as a recovering perfectionist, I feel like I always wanted, hopefully recovering, I always wanted to be that perfect person, right? Where I was like, I want to be well-rounded. I want to
Yeah.
be strong in all of these areas, or at least not, super weak in some of them. And I remember talking to one of my supervisors at the time, and she said it's so much more important to build a well-rounded team than to be a well-rounded individual. And that has stuck with
Ooh.
me since college. And I think it applies to everything, of course, evaluation included, where we might be hesitant to do something
Hmm.
or change the way that we are doing something because of that mental barrier
Hmm.
and knowing even if it's subconsciously, like this isn't what I'm good at. And I don't, my body, my brain doesn't like feeling uncomfortable. Its sole job is to make me feel safe. And so if I don't feel safe, then I'm not gonna do the thing
Yeah.
because that's just my like self-preservation protection mode kind of kicking in. So no, I wouldn't be surprised if that is part of what's holding folks back from doing evaluation right.
Yeah. Do you believe that one person should be solely responsible for evaluation? Like on if you are on a team?
No, I think of everyone, even outside of just the learning team,
Hmm.
is responsible for evaluation because all evaluation is making sure that you are on track to achieving your goals. Like, why wouldn't everybody be responsible for that?
Do you think one person should own evaluation though?
Um, I think they could. It probably depends on resources in an organization. I think it makes sense for there to be ahead of that initiative. Like
Hmm.
I'm going to be the project manager of our evaluation, but I think a team or an organization in general will be more successful if everybody is part of that evaluation process.
Agree. But I think that someone needs to own the fact that it's happening. And so, and
Yeah.
like be kind of a little bit of the keeper of process and almost being that this is a question you tell me you get a lot is how who's responsible for ensuring like the required drivers are happening and things like that. And like that's where I think that person can really come in and it's like everyone has to do it and be part of it and like they're that resource to help you do it, but they're not the only person that's doing it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100%. And I do think, you know, ownership is important so that just like in any task, everyone might be involved in getting it done, but if no one person's actually responsible, then it might slip through the cracks,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I mean, that's even why we've added for this year's programs, we've slightly adjusted that blended evaluation plan that we use to include a column where you have to define ahead of time when you're planning your project who is going to be that person that is checking, because you can have a great plan, but if no one is following up
Right.
and making sure it's executed, then we know that it will fail, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that column has been added for that purpose, and it doesn't have to be just one person, especially if it makes more sense for, other stakeholders or whoever to be that follow-up. But yeah, I do think that is part of the planning process. You have to identify who it is that's responsible. Otherwise, it won't get done.
Right. Yeah. And at the end of the day, right, it becomes like like they didn't, it's just like everyone pointing fingers. Like, what's that meme with
Hmm.
Spider-Man where there's like a million Spider-Mans like all pointing at each other? It becomes sort of like that situation.
Yeah.
And I think what I love about having someone too on the team that's like kind of like they understand the process, they understand the end goal, they probably know a little bit more about like the holistic piece of evaluation, right?
Mm.
And have pretty good skills in like all of the different areas that you need for evaluation. They can also then share, because they're looking at what's working and what's not, where are the success stories, and sharing across, different departments and areas of the organization. Like, this is what's working when it comes to required drivers, when it comes to collecting data, like this type of learning intervention is working really well. And I think it's important to have someone that's sharing the success story. So we're starting to replicate what's working, and also say, we need to stop doing that, like this thing, because we're clearly like, this is not working, right? Like no one is getting anything out of that sort of intervention. So someone has to own that we need to stop it. So, okay. So we've got this like owner person over like helping to be the accountability person, let's say, to ensure evaluation is happening. Who else do you think should be part of like an evaluation team?
Mm. Well, looking at the overall process, I think it kind of does boil down into like you have the brain of the operation, you have the
Mm-hmm.
heart of the operation, and then like the body, like the hands and feet, the doer of the operation. So, with that kind of in mind, I think if it's one person or a couple people, however you want to break it up, but someone is probably stronger in like the analytical side of things, right? So they might be the ones that are collecting the data, analyzing the data, drawing conclusions from it, like very heady.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then there's also probably a strength that has to do with the heart, like the relationship component of it, because we talk so much about how relationships, not with just stakeholders, but the participants themselves, the participants' managers, like everyone that's involved. So whoever is a good relationship builder or a connector, they'll also probably be really good at collecting that qualitative data
Mm-hmm.
if especially if they're building rapport in training with the
Yeah.
participants, like they are probably excellent formative evaluation uh, gatherers, if you will. And then that third piece is probably the doer, like the person that's actually building stuff and executing stuff um, that the analytical person might have planned, for instance, if they are different people. But I think it is a balance between all of those typical strength domains.
Yeah. Um, as you were talking, I was thinking about like, what are people going to say when they hear this? Like, Jordan, Vanessa, like this is not realistic, right? Like we've got millions of evaluations that we have to do, right? We can't like one person needs to be responsible for like the entirety of an evaluation, right? Because we've got too many evaluations to do. And I was just thinking like, what would I say to that? You know what I mean? And like, and thinking about I've got specific customers of ours in mind that I'm thinking of as and like I'm literally picturing them. So I feel like I'm all over the place at the moment. But when I think about how can we restructure that department, right? And I think about how much more efficient would it be if someone was looking at like we're not all starting from the ground like reinventing the wheel every single time putting together a blended evaluation plan, because I've seen this sort of similar intervention. I know these sort of things I can start to populate being the brain, right? Being the analyst or like the architect. If we look at the new certification journey for Kirkpatrick, right? The bronze program,
Yeah.
you're an architect. Your job is to develop the plan and the strategy for how to evaluate a program. And then we've got this subset program, the builder program, right? now it's time to be the hands and the feet and start building the tools and making sure that you're doing focus groups and interviews correctly. And then we've got the analyst program, which is a bit of, the heart and a bit of the brain piece of it, right? Where we're talking about like, how do you analyze the data, you collect the data, how do you do that analysis? I even think we can go a step further and really talk about empathetic interviewing, right? And like being a journalist. Like I think that's a whole situation in and of itself. And so I'm saying all this to say, like, imagine if there was one person that was just sitting there able to start way ahead of the game saying like, I've seen this sort of intervention, these sorts of evaluation tactics work well, right? Mm-hmm. And then you're just customizing it for the uniqueness of that intervention that you're evaluating, but you've started 5 steps ahead because you know generally what works and you can start a little bit faster. It's like almost like using AI, right? To build your evaluation plan. They take that first stab and you go faster and you work faster from it. And so I think that's one thing that I would challenge customers to really think about is like, imagine having one or not just one, right? Like a few people. That is your job. You create the evaluation plan and then it's like an assembly line, right? Then you hand it to your empathetic interviewers to go out and collect the data, or you hand it to your builder to create the survey questions and create the focus group questions and the rubrics. And then that person hands it to the interviewer, the person that can really relate, right? So if I think about the skills needed to be an empathetic interviewer or like a forensic journalist, if you will, and the skills to be someone that understands like how what comes out of the data, 2 totally different skill sets.
Yeah. And I think too, like what you frequently talk about with closing the loop on evaluation data, right? So often I think evaluation is seen as that like black and white. It's just the numbers, it's the data, like we're just collecting it because we have to, right? Mm-hmm. But if you think about why are we evaluating in the first place, of course, we want to improve job performance, but that is so deeply connected to a human experience, right? Like when I'm performing well, I feel better, just like we started the conversation off talking about, right? Using our strengths. So if no one is following up with me on my performance, or I don't feel like anyone cares about that experience that I'm having, or even if a goal of the program is to improve employee engagement, like the reason why I got into learning in the first place is because I'm just naturally passionate about that learning experience. And because I've been a learner and it feels good and it feels warm and fuzzy and I know all the good that can come of it. Mm-hmm. And then you get the pressure to like connect it to business value and data. And that's where you start to lose some of the heart. Mm-hmm. But absolutely, I think that the interviewer is not just able to connect and ask empathetic questions, but they're able to also remind people that we're interviewing, like the purpose, the why behind it, that like we care about you genuinely, hopefully.
Well, and it becomes that person that is great at building relationships. And we talk about how do you then gain buy-in with your stakeholders. That's the person I'm putting in front, right? To be like, I need you to go and connect with this commander or this general and do your magic that like you had that secret sauce to do, as opposed to, because you're like the representative for our team and for our initiative, as opposed to having that stakeholder have 5 of us come to them, because we are all working on different things. We're all working on different evaluation plans, right? And so now it's 4 or 5 people coming to them, as opposed to having one person, one point of contact, someone that's really good at developing that relationship and then rolling up and connecting that bigger picture of like how all of these different things impact their strategic plan or their initiative or or the mission of the organization, right? It becomes a lot easier and the messaging is more cohesive and consistent. And so you gain more. in that way. So I think there's that aspect of it too with the empathetic interviewer. And I don't want to say like one role is better than another, right?
No,
Like you need
all
all
are
of them.
necessary.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And like you could also be really good at multiple things. And maybe you're part, it's like some days I want to be a builder and some days I want to be like the brains of the operation, right? Because I'm able to flip. It's just, I think being able to be excellent at all three of those areas is where I think there's going to be a challenge.
Right.
And if you can put the right person in certain areas, I think that's going to be even better. And the challenge I see with like the builder is they've got to have resources or good knowledge on like psychometrics when they're developing interview questions, when they're developing like rubrics, and when they're developing survey questions and things like that. Because if we're not putting out evaluation tools that are valid, how can we really trust our data?
Yeah.
I mean, like I've been told by psychometricians, like whether or not you start with a 0 or a 1, like on a Likert scale, completely changes the data that you got, and we all know like, 4 versus 5 versus 7 options, right? Like your data becomes all different. And like, it's really important that someone who is like if you really want to make data-driven decisions for an organization, you've got to have someone who's developing those tools, who really understands how those decisions that they're making when they're developing the questions and the tools impact how the data gets turned around. And this whole conversation that also brings me back to like another thing that I hear from customers a lot right now, and that we're talking to them about like on a more global level, is how do they centralize evaluation? And we get requests from customers and they say, particularly we work a lot in the federal government and DOD, and they say, we get these requests from like Congress, but we've got all these different programs and everyone's developing their own evaluation plans and their own evaluation tools, but they don't want all 75 evaluation plans and tools, right? They want one report. Everyone's asking things slightly differently. And it's really hard. It's a manual process for us to then take that data, collate it. It takes a long time for us to produce that final report that like Congress is asking for, or, like front office is asking for. And so when you're able to centralize your evaluation team and say like, you're responsible for this, they've got more of that knowledge, knowing I've got to connect my questions across plans and across programs, so that when we do have to roll things up, it's a much easier and faster process, provided we have the right technology tools as well.
Well, and even just the right framework, right? Like that's why the Kirkpatrick model, I mean, obviously we're biased, but it has stuck around because it just works as a framework. It makes sense. And I think that to have a framework that, yes, you can dive really specifically into types of questions if you must, but looking across all your programs, you should still generally be able to categorize, did this program or what percentage of our programs met our expectations for level 1? What percentage of our programs met expectations for level 2?
Yep.
Level 3 and level 4. Like the framework of the model itself is so helpful with figuring out how do we standardize the way that we are collecting data and reporting data and rolling it up, because the rolling it up is in those 4 categories.
Right. And I think too, one other area that I think is a point of contention and frustration, my evaluation doesn't happen, is because we get like a lot of people get math anxiety. And they think of evaluation as metrics and numbers and like, how am I supposed to make all of this sense? We've got data in a million sort of places. How do I bring it all together to like roll it up? And that's where it's like, You can't. You can't, right? But you can find the person that can help you make sense of it so that you can roll up that data. It is possible. It is doable. We know organizations do this all the time. It's just you've got to partner with the right person on your team who doesn't get that anxiety, who's able to make sense of data and to be able to then pull it all together, whether it's like in Power BI or in Qualtrics or whatever tool that you're using, right? To make sense of it, to say, this is how we're going to then make decisions. And so I think that's also like a really big piece and a big person to have on your team in order to do evaluation, right? Because in a world now where we have so many systems, our data is so spread out than ever before.
Right. Well, and I think that's where, like as we're talking a lot about like the brain, the heart, the, hands and feet of the operation, a lot of that is very technical and, on the ground type of work. But going back to your original point about having someone who is a leader or a project manager of that domain, they can see the bigger picture to help narrow down like, okay, how in the weeds do we really need to get you all? And I think that that is a big barrier that we see across all of the stories and the people that come through our programs. As a classic overthinker myself, like I do it all the time too, where you overcomplicate it, right? And you're like, we're collecting all this data, but for what? How are we using it? Why do we need 70 different questions on a survey? Are we going to use every single question in a strategic way? Or can we actually eliminate a lot of what we're talking about and narrow it down to those 4 buckets and to the core components of the model?
Right.
And I think that a lot of people don't want to change that. There's resistance because, of course, that's how it's always been done. Or maybe they don't have autonomy and like the actual agency to change surveys if we're, only thinking about that one method. But it's, my next book that I'm about to read is Essentialism, and it's all about like, how do you just focus on the essentials? Because I think that that also is a big barrier for why A, we don't do evaluation because we think it has to be so complicated, and B, why it's so hard to roll it all up in a centralized report.
Yeah, that's why I'm really excited about some of the work that we're doing behind the scenes on like impact studies and like how far into the weeds do we have to truly get to find out whether or not something is working or not? Because one thing that people get concerned about is like, well, I have to actually just heard this the other day. I circled back with someone who reached out and he was like, yeah, I think we're going to set up the metrics, but like we've got to wait a year or two. And I'm like, you've got to wait a year or two to figure out this program is working when it's already been implemented for a year.
Right.
Let's talk about a different way that we can evaluate and see what is working and what's not, and then make decisions from there and set up. And from there, you can set up what you need to set up to do that more longitudinal impact study, right? And see how things are going. But I think to your point, right, like we overcomplicate evaluation, and that's part of why I like having a team, because you have different perspectives, and someone can stop and say, like, to your point, right, like if I'm overthinking or you're overthinking, I could be like, Jordan, we got to pull your head back up, sweetie. You know what I mean? Like we got to see the forest through the trees, which I do sometimes. Like we got to see the forest through the trees, right? We're not like but that's what you get, right? But you have to build trust and have psychological safety in that team in order to be able to do that. And that becomes a whole thing. Now, we talked a lot about a team. What if that's not a possibility, right? Does it mean all hope is lost?
No, of course not. I mean, like I said, I've been a team of one, a team of two before, and no, I have not done everything perfectly in the past either. Especially now that I'm much more educated and aware of evaluation stuff. But I think that it's just a matter of filling in the gaps enough that you can do something without getting stuck in that process that we opened the conversation with, right? Where like you're only focusing on your weaknesses, you're not leveraging your strengths. Like there will be limitations probably most of the time. Like, no, I don't think any of us exist in an ideal world, even though we can try to aim for it.
Right.
So you almost are just accepting that there will be things that aren't perfect. This
Yep.
is something I'm working on too. And you just get comfortable with that, right? You're like, okay, I'm going to focus my efforts where I know it will make the most impact and the most sense and that I am most equipped to do,
Yep.
but I'm not going to try to reinvent the whole wheel where I end up doing nothing
Agree.
differently.
Agree. And I think that becomes an opportunity to then build out your team. But then also, like, if like that's if you're a department of one, but if you are a department of many, right, or like two or three, then it's like, I'm going to take these areas, you're going to take that when it comes to evaluation. But you kind of start to like build that out as much as you can. And I think, like broken record, tale as old as time, right? But like we're in a place where there's so much technology out there that can help us get started, that can help us in certain areas that we can work on, so that can supplement for the areas that we may not be as strong in. So just because you've got no one else to define the relationship with on your team, that does not mean all hope is lost for you and that you should not join our webinar. But that is also why you need to find your community and find your people, right? So that more than ever is why, I built the Kirkpatrick community, right? Like big, like misconception is that you have to be part of like a bronze or silver architect or analyst like program in order to join it. But you can join it on your own, right? Not be certified. Just you want to be part of a community in which you're learning more about evaluation. You're accessing like our tools and our resources, and you're accessing our lectureship series with our guest speakers and our community hours. But just have a place to go to ask your questions, because that's the other piece. Like I didn't necessarily, like in certain areas of where I'm weaker, if you will, right? Like not in my strength, like I'm not always sure where to go to ask my question. I'm sure as hell not going to post about it on LinkedIn for like, hey everyone, like I stink at this. Like that's just like not really something I'm going to do. Where do I some areas I don't know where to go, or I ask trusted colleagues, right? And so that's why that community becomes so crucial for those departments of one to be like, I need help building relationships, understanding how I can understand, like one thing we talk about, commander intent, when they say we need training on X, like what is really his intent when he's saying we need training on X, right? How do you bridge that gap? How do you understand it? Or I need help making sure that, how do I cut down this survey to ask only the essentials, and that's what that's for. So you can be a department of one or a community, or a department of one, but know that you have to find your community and you have to find your people. So that's how you build out a team, even though they're not necessarily, obviously doing work for you, if you will.
Yeah. I feel like, we were just having this conversation with one of our clients where it's like, they don't have the manpower, woman power to have folks that are dedicated to following up with people after they go through a certification program, right? They do private programs often with us, and they really want to follow up. And we're like, that's what the community's for. Like when we have community events, like let us fill the gaps that your internal team can't quite do it yet. Like if you aren't hiring people, if you don't have an evaluation branch or anyone that is dedicated to that's why there is such a value in the community, is because you can invest minimal resources but get that need met, even though it's not, only for your organization. But honestly, that's kind of a perk in my eyes. Like you're going to get more ideas outside of your organization too. So
Agree.
I'm with you. I think we built something with a lot of intention and purpose and value. So
yeah, I didn't want people to feel lonely. I know what feeling lonely is like at work, and it's not fun. So with that, friends, let's not forget defining the relationship. We talk all about your evaluation team. We dive more into the skills needed for the people on your team. and how you build trust and community amongst each other. That will be February 13th at 12 p.m. Eastern. We will have the registration link in the show notes, and it'll be on our website. And if you are catching this after, or you cannot be there on the 13th, you can register anyway to catch the replay, because the recording will be made available for you all. And Jordan, thank you so much for coming. We will be hearing much more from you as the year progresses, maybe even like an on the road series. And just so you all know, Jordan has been posting some killer little short clips on her LinkedIn all about evaluation. So make sure you follow her on LinkedIn to catch those nuggets of wisdom. And we will catch you all on the next episode.